The Galactic Accord had one law above all others when it came to the sovereign bloodlines of Earth. You did not pursue them. You did not track them. You did not, under any circumstances, attempt to identify, locate, or claim a human woman whose lineage had been designated sovereign class by the old conclave records, not unless she had first indicated by her own free will that she wished to be found. And yet, every single one of the 47 eligible alien males currently aboard Helix Station 9 was doing exactly that. Commander Drek Val of the Vilthari Empire watched it from the upper observation tier with his arms crossed and his expression flat, the way it always was when he was thinking something he had no intention of saying aloud. He had been stationed on Helix 9 for 3 cycles now, long enough to know every corridor, every maintenance shaft, every diplomatic lounge and fuel bay and emergency hatch on the entire rotating structure. Long enough to have read every file that passed through the station's central intelligence relay. Long enough to have grown very, very tired of most things. He had not grown tired of watching this. The girl, the woman, he corrected himself, because she was clearly not a child, even if she moved like something that had not yet been caught, was cutting through the lower market ring at a pace that suggested she knew she was being followed and had decided to do nothing about it except walk faster. She was human. That much was obvious. The shape of her, the color of her skin, the particular way her dark hair caught the amber light of the vendor stalls, all of it was unmistakably, almost painfully human. On a station this far out in the Veth corridor, humans were not rare exactly, but they were not common either. Most of them were traders, translators, cargo handlers. They moved through Helix 9 with the practiced invisibility of people who had learned very early that the surest way to survive in alien space was to take up as little room as possible. This one was not doing that. She moved like she owned the corridor. She moved like the corridor was a temporary inconvenience and the universe was going to need to get out of her way. She moved like she was furious about something, and had decided that fury was too valuable an energy to waste by sitting still with it, so she was going to use it to walk across the station instead. There was something in the efficiency of her stride, the precision, the awareness, the way her eyes tracked the exits of every space she passed through without appearing to do so, that told him she had been moving like this for a long time. Not panicked, never panicked, but always ready. Behind her, at staggered intervals that probably seemed subtle to them, came the suitors. Drek Val had started calling them that 3 days ago, when the first tracking alert had come across his console. Keth Orn of the Sorvani Dominion, rated 7th in line for succession, had flagged an anomaly in the station's bioscan records. A human woman, sovereign bloodline markers, unregistered, unclaimed. Within 6 hours, the alert had propagated through 3 separate diplomatic channels, 2 underground data brokers, and what Drek Val was relatively certain was a Vilthari intelligence operative who owed someone a favor. By the end of the first day, there had been 11 of them. By the end of the second day, 23. By the morning of the third day, 39 and climbing. Now, watching from the upper tier, he counted 47. He watched the woman duck under a low-hanging spice vendor's awning, emerge on the other side without breaking stride, and take a hard left turn into a maintenance alcove that should have been a dead end. She came out the other side 40 seconds later through a great access panel that was technically not supposed to open from the inside. Behind her, 3 of the suitors collided with each other trying to follow. One of them, he thought it might be the younger Drath male who had arrived yesterday on a private transport, went sprawling into the spice vendor's display, which collapsed with a noise loud enough to cause everyone within 20 meters to stop and stare. The woman did not stop and stare. She was already rounding the far corner at a pace that left no ambiguity about her feelings on the situation. Drek Val allowed himself a very small, very private expression of something that was almost amusement. He pushed off the railing and started walking. Not toward her, not yet. He walked toward the station's central nervous system instead, a room that most people on Helix 9 did not know existed, tucked behind a power relay junction on Deck 7. His access codes opened the door without complaint. The room hummed with data, screens cycling through bioscan feeds and comm logs and atmospheric readings, and the 1001 monitoring systems that kept a rotating structure of 8,000 inhabitants alive in deep space. He sat down and started reading. Her name, the name she was currently using, which was almost certainly not her real name, was Myra Caslin. She had arrived on Helix 9 4 days ago on a cargo hauler registered out of the Outer Rim trading post known as Calyx Drift. Before that, according to the transit records he was able to pull, she had been on 6 different stations in the past 8 months, never staying longer than a week, always leaving on vessels that had no obvious connection to each other. A new name at every stop, or close enough. Minor alterations, the kind that slid past standard transit processing without triggering flags. The kind of alterations a person learned through practice. She was running. Or more precisely, she had been running. The Accord's bioscan sweep 3 days ago, a routine procedure that she had apparently not anticipated, or had not been able to avoid, had flagged her bloodline markers. And now, the running had turned into something considerably more complicated, because 47 different alien males were attempting to track the location of a woman who had spent the better part of a year learning how to make herself unfindable. Drek Val leaned back in his chair and looked at the screen for a long moment. The Accord's bloodline laws were ancient, older than most of the civilizations currently represented on Helix 9. In the early era of interspecies contact, when humans had first entered the galactic community, and the Conclave was still trying to decide what to do with them, certain lineages had been identified whose genetic and neurological profiles showed extraordinary compatibility with the dominant alien species. The biological markers were specific, certain sequences in the hereditary code, certain neurological configurations that the Conclave's xenobiologists had spent decades mapping. These were designated the sovereign bloodlines. Not property. The Accord was very careful about that language, not resources, not prizes. The official terminology was valued heritage, and the legal framework built around it was genuinely protective in some ways. A woman of sovereign lineage had legal standing in any Accord court that most humans never received, was entitled to diplomatic protections regardless of her citizen status, and could not be detained, coerced, or harassed under penalty of sanctions that extended up the chain of command to the highest levels of whatever civilization the harasser represented. What it also meant, and what the Accord was considerably less careful about acknowledging, was that every ambitious male in every member civilization spent a significant portion of his life hoping to be the one she chose. Because the protections were significant, the status was real. And the biological compatibility that the Conclave had identified, whatever it actually meant in practice, and the science was considerably murkier than the legal language implied, was treated as enormously valuable by families who understood the long-term implications. And she had to choose. That was the other part. The bonding could not be claimed, could not be forced or coerced or obtained through deception. The sovereign bloodline protections explicitly and specifically prohibited all of those things, and the penalties for attempting them were severe enough that even the most powerful families thought twice. Which meant that the 47 men currently following this woman through the lower market ring of Helix Station 9 were doing something that was, technically, entirely within their legal rights. They were trying to impress her. Drek Val watched the bioscan feed track her through the market ring, up a service ladder, across a narrow bridge between 2 rotating segments of the outer ring, and into the quieter residential corridors of Deck 4. She moved with the economical fluency of someone who had learned these systems quickly, who had made a habit of learning them quickly everywhere she went, because knowing the maintenance access and the service routes and the non-obvious pathways through a place was how you kept options open. She stopped outside a sealed door. Her own quarters, he assumed. She stood there for a moment, one hand flat on the door panel, and then she turned and looked directly at the corridor behind her. The suitors, still at their staggered intervals, all stopped. Even through the bioscan feed, even without being able to see her face clearly, Drek Val had the distinct impression that whatever expression she was wearing in that moment was not a kind one. It was a look that had been refined over time, the way all practiced things get refined, distilled down to its essential element, which in this case appeared to be a combination of exhaustion and contempt, so complete it required no words. She went inside and locked the door. The suitors clustered in the corridor like a confused tide that had just been refused by the shore. Several of them were consulting each other in low voices. Two had begun the process of composing what he assumed were formal comm messages. One, Keth Orn, he was fairly certain from the Sorvani delegation, was already dictating something into a personal recorder with an expression of concentrated purpose that suggested he considered himself to have an angle the others had missed. Drek Val turned off the screen. He sat in the dark of the data room for a long moment, thinking about what he'd read and what he'd watched, and the particular quality of exhaustion in how that woman had stood at her door and looked back at the corridor. Then he stood up and went to find her. Part 2, the corner. He did not go to her door. He was many things, and some of them were not things he was particularly proud of, but he was not a man who showed up at a woman's locked door after she had just demonstrated, quite clearly, that she did not want to be followed, that she had been demonstrating this for 8 months, and 47 different people had not absorbed the message was not a reason to become the 48th. Instead, he went to the small commissary on Deck 4 that served the residential corridor where she was staying. He ordered something hot to drink from the machine. The machine's idea of tea was deeply suspect, a pale amber liquid with chemical undertones that suggested a passing familiarity with the concept of tea rather than any actual experience of it. And he sat in the corner booth with his back to the wall, and he waited. The corner booth had two advantages. It was the most defensible position in the room, with sight lines to both entrances, and it was also the booth that a person walking in and scanning for threat assessment would identify first as the safe position. He had thought carefully about this before sitting down. She appeared 40 minutes later. He had not been certain she would. But she was human, and humans needed to eat, and the commissary was the closest food source to her quarters, and she had not left her door in 5 hours, and at some point practical necessity would override tactical caution. She stopped in the doorway when she saw him, not because she recognized him specifically, he thought, but because she had spent the last 3 days developing an extremely refined awareness of every male presence in any room she entered, and he was a male presence, and she was performing the rapid calculation that had clearly become second nature to her. He did not look up from his drink. She decided, after a moment, to come in. She went to the food machine and ordered something. She collected it. She looked at the tables. The commissary was mostly empty at this hour. 2 Korathi traders in the far corner, paying no attention to anything except their own conversation. A human cargo handler near the door who had fallen asleep over his meal, with the philosophical acceptance of someone who had long since stopped fighting his body's demands. And there was Drek Val in the corner booth, looking at his drink. She came and sat across from him. He looked up, she looked back. He noticed this the way he noticed most things, cataloging it without particular emotional investment, considerably more remarkable up close than she had been on the bioscan feed. Not in the way that the suitors seemed to mean when they spoke about the sovereign bloodlines in the breathless, acquisitive way they spoke about most things they wanted. Just remarkable. The kind of face that held things behind it. The kind of eyes that had been watching exits for a long time and had gotten very good at it without losing the capacity to be genuinely attentive. "You're not following me," she said. It was not quite a question. "No," he agreed. "You've been in this commissary for 40 minutes. He looked at her over the rim of his cup. "I come here often." A pause, her expression didn't change. "You're lying." "Yes," he said, without any particular guilt about it. "I was waiting to see if you'd come out." Something shifted in her expression, not quite anger. Something more careful than that, the evaluation of whether this was a new kind of approach she hadn't encountered yet. "Why?" "Because you look tired." She stared at him, the stare had weight to it. "That's your reason." "That and curiosity." He set down his cup. "You've spent 3 days running from 47 males who are all attempting, through various combinations of charm, resource display, and spectacularly poor spatial awareness, to make you notice them. I wanted to know if you were all right." A long silence. She ate a bite of whatever the food machine had produced for her, which appeared to be some variety of grain and protein block that was common in residential commissaries across the Accord, nutritionally adequate, gastronomically bleak. Her eyes didn't leave him. "You're Velthari," she said finally. "Yes." "High rank, the sigils on your collar." "Commander 5th tier." "That's," she paused, clearly running the Accord equivalency table in her head. "That's actually fairly senior, isn't it?" "Somewhat." "And you're on Helix 9 because—" "Diplomatic posting. I oversee the station's Accord compliance reporting." He watched her process this. "I know what you're thinking." "What am I thinking?" "That a senior Velthari commander with access to Accord compliance reporting has considerable access to a great deal of information, including bioscan records and transit logs." Her jaw tightened slightly. "Did you read my file?" "Yes." "All of it?" "Yes." Another silence, longer this time. She took another bite, very deliberately, as though maintaining the ordinary action of eating was something she had decided to hold on to in the face of a situation that kept threatening to become unordinary. "And you're not here to—" She stopped. "No," he said, "I'm not." "You don't know what I was going to say. You were going to ask if I'm here to make my case, to present myself as a candidate, to explain why I would be the superior choice among the current field, given my rank, my access to information, and the fact that I clearly knew your location before your door locked." He looked at her steadily. "The answer is no. I'm not here to do any of those things." "Then why are you here?" He considered the question seriously, the way he considered most things. "Because I've been watching someone run for 3 days, and I thought, perhaps incorrectly, that what you might want, more than another person attempting to convince you of something, was someone who would simply sit here and ask nothing of you at all." She looked at him for a very long time. The cargo handler by the door turned over in his sleep and exhaled loudly. The Korathi traders laughed at something. The food machine hummed its quiet, relentless hum. "Myra Caslin," she said, "or you know that's not my real name." "I do. My real name is Sira." She said it the way people said things they hadn't said in a long time, testing whether the words still fit in the mouth. "Sira Vane." He inclined his head. "Commander Drek Val." A beat. Then unexpectedly she almost smiled. It wasn't a full smile, but it was something in the vicinity of one, a small easing around the eyes. "You said perhaps incorrectly." "I did." "That's not quite the same as being wrong about it." "No," he said, "it's not." She pulled her food block closer. "You were right. This is, you sitting here asking nothing of me, is the nicest thing anyone on this station has done in 3 days. That's a very low bar." "It is." She met his eyes again, and this time whatever she found there seemed to satisfy some internal question because the careful watchfulness in her expression shifted slightly. Not gone, but easier. The way watchfulness gets when it decides it can afford to be less acute. Can I ask you something? Yes. Do you know where they are right now? The 47. He did know. He had looked at the positioning data before he left the data room, partly because it was relevant to his official responsibilities, and partly because he had wanted to know. Most of them are still clustered near your door. 8 have taken positions in the corridor junction that provides line of sight to this commissary entrance. 2 have gone to the station administration office, presumably to attempt to register a formal bonding intent, which will fail because that process requires the woman's countersignature, and the administrator on duty tonight is Veth Kalorn, who will not bend that rule for anyone. He paused. 1 has sent you 14 messages in the past hour. She closed her eyes briefly. Keth Orn. You know him. He found me 2 stations ago, at Calyx Drift, the transit hub. I thought I'd lost him when I changed vessels. She opened her eyes. He's persistent. He's also, as of an hour ago, formally under observation by my office for violating station conduct protocols. Specifically, the provision against transmission harassment. He held her gaze. The formal citation was filed before I came here. It carries an automatic communication block until the matter is reviewed by the compliance board. She looked at him. Something in her face shifted again, differently this time, not the almost smile. Something quieter and more careful. The kind of expression that belongs to someone who has been doing something alone for a long time and has just encountered, unexpectedly, help from a direction they didn't expect. You did that before you even knew if I'd come out of my room, she said. Yes. Why? Because it needed doing. He picked up his cup again, regardless of anything else. Part 3, The Archive. She came back to the commissary the next morning. He was already there. He had arrived 20 minutes before she appeared, not because he had calculated her schedule, but because the commissary on Deck 4 made better use of the heating elements than the one on Deck 2, and the morning hours were the only time it was consistently empty enough to think. She sat across from him again, and for a while neither of them said much. She drank something that the machine produced when you asked it for coffee, a pale approximation, she mentioned, of actual coffee, the kind made from Earth-origin beans that required specific growing conditions unavailable this far out from the inner systems. He worked through a series of reports on a data pad that he would have been working through regardless of her presence, though his progress through them was somewhat slower than usual. It was, he would think later, one of the more comfortable mornings he'd had in some time. You mentioned Calyx Drift, she said eventually, in my file. Yes. I was there for almost 2 months. That's the longest I'd stayed anywhere in the past year. She turned her cup slowly on the table. I had a job. Not a real job, not the kind with a contract and formal documentation, but steady work translating cargo manifests for a trader named Os who had been in the outer lanes for so long he'd let his Accord standard atrophy completely. He paid in fair weight and asked no questions. A pause. I liked it. I was good at it. I was going to stay longer. He waited. Then someone ran my bioscan at the Drift's transit hub. Routine check, they said. Probably was. She looked up. But the bloodline flag goes out automatically. I don't know if there's even a person making the decision. I think it just propagates, the same way it propagated here. 1 scan, and within hours there were people on the Drift asking around. Os told me. He came to find me before they did. A brief pause. He was a good man. I was gone within 6 hours. How long has it been like this? She considered, counting perhaps or deciding how much to say. Since I was 22, 8 years. 8 years, he absorbed that. You were identified young. I was born in a sovereign bloodline archive settlement on Earth's northern continent. My mother's family had been in the archive system for 5 generations. They kept the records, maintained the lineage documentation, cooperated with the Accord's registry requirements. She paused. It was not a bad life. The settlement was small but well-resourced. We had things that most Earth communities that far from the major centers didn't have. Good medical facilities, educational access, strong connections to the Accord's trade networks. Her voice was precise and careful, the voice of someone describing something they have had to think about from multiple angles. When I turned 22, I was presented. That's the word they used, presented to the community. Who was there? 12 males. 5 from Earth-based families who had Accord connections, second and third sons mostly, who understood the status implications better than they understood anything else about the situation. 7 from Accord delegations, including representatives from 4 different member civilizations. Her jaw was level, controlled. They had all been waiting. Some of them had been waiting for years, I learned afterward. The archive settlement notifies the registry when a sovereign lineage girl approaches majority. It's standard procedure. And you left. 3 days after the presentation, yes. She looked at him with the directness that he was coming to understand, simply the way she looked at things, not aggression, not challenge, just a fundamental unwillingness to look away from what was true. My mother was furious. She had spent 20 years preparing me for that moment, and I walked away from it in 3 days. The archive elders were furious. 2 of the Accord delegation representatives sent formal retrieval requests within the week. She paused on that word, the way you pause on something that still has edges. Retrieval. As though I were a document that had been misfiled. The requests were denied. After 14 months of legal challenges, yes, I had a very good advocate, a human lawyer who specialized in Accord Earth boundary law, a woman named Karis who I think enjoyed the fight almost as much as she enjoyed winning it. Something crossed her face that was close to warmth. The bloodline protections are quite clear that consent is not optional. In writing, in every language, extremely unambiguous. The problem is that legal clarity doesn't make people stop wanting. So. She picked up her cup. So I've been moving. Moving, he repeated, not running. Moving, I prefer it, she looked at him. What's the difference between you and the 47? The question was direct and deserved a direct answer. I'm not interested in your bloodline. No. No, your bloodline is a legal designation that other people have decided is enormously important to them. That's their investment, not mine. He set down his data pad. I am interested in the person sitting across from me. The one who spent 8 years moving through the outer stations, who found work as a manifest translator and apparently became quite good at it, who spent last night in a locked room while 47 men waited in her corridor, and who came back to this commissary this morning. Possibly, I think, because it was the only room on the station where someone asked how she was doing before asking anything else. She was quiet for a moment. That's a very precise thing to say, she said. I try to be precise. Are you usually? Yes. Then answer me something precisely. She set down her cup. You have access to the station's entire data relay. You can see where I am at any moment, where everyone is, what every comm message says. You knew about the 14 messages from Keth Orn before I did. Yes. You could have used that information differently. You could have come to my door with it, presented yourself as the person who already knew, who had the access, who could control what information reached me. Her eyes were steady. That would have been a very effective approach. Yes, he said, it would have. Why didn't you? He thought about how to say this accurately. Because every approach that uses information as leverage, no matter how it's framed, is still leverage. And because the 47 men in your corridor came to your door because they wanted something, I didn't want you to open the door for any of those reasons. He met her eyes. I wanted you to walk into a room and choose where to sit. The commissary was quiet around them. I chose this booth, she said. Yes, he said, you did. Part 4: The Hunt. On the morning of the 5th day, the situation outside her door escalated. Drek Val was in his office when the alert came through, a physical altercation in the residential corridor on Deck 4, Section 7, two males refusing to yield position in a space that the station's corridor protocols required both of them to transit simultaneously. A Sorvani and a Drath male. The station security team had them separated within 4 minutes, but the incident created a cascade. 6 other suitors used the distraction to attempt to advance their own positions in the corridor, jostling for the spots with better sight lines to her door. A Korathi male, whom Drek Val had not previously identified as a serious actor in the situation, attempted to breach her quarters using a stolen maintenance access code. The breach attempt failed. Her door was on a security tier above what the maintenance code could access. But the attempt itself was a significant escalation. And Keth Orn sent 22 messages in a 40-minute span, a volume and frequency that constituted not just harassment, but, under the station's formal protocols, the beginning of a threatening pattern. Drek Val locked the station's bioscan reporting under a Level 3 access restriction. He had the authority to do this under his Accord compliance mandate. The justification was legitimate and would withstand review. It meant that the propagating alerts that had been feeding the suitor numbers would now go silent. No new arrivals would receive the bloodline flag, and the number, which had climbed steadily for 4 days, would not climb further. Then he filed a formal incident report on the Korathi breach attempt. Then he escalated the Keth Orn citation from observation status to active violation, which triggered the automatic communication block he'd been holding in reserve. Then he went to her door. She opened it before he had the chance to knock. I heard it, she said. She was dressed fully, as though she had not been sleeping. Her bag, the one he'd seen in the corner of her room when the bioscan had swept the quarter's interior, was sitting on the floor by her feet, closed but within arm's reach. Are you all right? I'm fine. She looked past him at the corridor, where 2 station security officers were still managing the aftermath of the altercation. Her expression was the controlled one, the one he had learned to recognize as the face she put on when she was deciding whether to let herself be angry about something that deserved anger. How many more are coming? No more. I've locked the bloodline flag on the bioscan relay. Any new arrivals to the station will not receive the alert. He paused. The 47 are still here. But the number won't grow. She nodded once. Her eyes moved to the bag by her feet and then back to him. Can I ask you something that isn't about the 47? She said. Yes. What do you actually do here? Not the title, the day-to-day of it. What does it look like? He considered. I read reports, a great many reports. I resolve disputes between Accord member representatives before they become incidents, and I manage incidents when prevention fails. I maintain the compliance documentation that the Central Accord Office requires of all diplomatic stations, which is more extensive than anyone outside the process understands. He paused. And I prevent, where possible, situations from becoming worse than they need to be. The last part. Yes. I'm reasonably good at the last part. I've noticed. She looked at him for a moment longer, then she stepped back from the door. Come in if you want. He came in. Her quarters were small. All residential quarters on Helix 9 were small, the architecture of necessity on a rotating deep space structure. But she had arranged them with the precision of someone who had spent a great deal of time in temporary spaces and had developed a system for making them feel inhabitable. The system was minimalist. One bag, nearly packed but not sealed. A data reader on the small table, open to something that appeared to be, from the brief glance he allowed himself, a history of the outer station networks. A cup, half empty, beside it. The space was clean and organized in a way that was functional rather than decorative. The way things look when you are always ready to leave, but you've made peace with not leaving yet. She sat on the edge of the sleeping platform. He stood near the door because it seemed like the appropriate choice. My mother's name is a Dravane, she said. She's still in the archive settlement. She has 2 younger daughters, my sisters, Kale and Mirren. They were presented at 22, both of them, and both of them accepted bondings within the year. Are they, he chose his words, were they happy about it? She was quiet for a moment, thinking. I don't think they were unhappy about it necessarily. I think for them it felt right. The way things feel right when you've been raised to expect them and the reality matches the expectation closely enough. She looked at her hands. Mirren wrote to me once 2 years after the bonding. She said she was content. She liked her partner. She had a good life, she said. A pause. She also said she didn't understand why I'd left, why I couldn't just, why it was so hard. And what would you have said if you'd answered? I kept thinking about what I wanted. What I actually wanted, separate from what I'd been told to want, separate from what the situation required, separate from everything external. She looked up at him. I couldn't find it. I sat in that room with 12 males waiting and I looked at each of them and I thought, is this what I want? And the answer was, I don't know. I don't know if this is what I want, and I don't know how to find out what I want while I'm standing in the middle of this. And if I say yes to any of them right now, I'm never going to know. So you left. I left. She said it simply, without apology, but not without the weight of everything it had cost. I didn't know when I left that I was going to spend 8 years running. I thought I'd go for a few months, find some space to breathe, figure out what I actually wanted, separate from all the wanting that was being done at me, and then she stopped. And then figure out the rest. A small, dry sound that was almost a laugh. 8 years later, I've figured out quite a lot of things. What I want, what I don't want. How to read a cargo manifest in 4 languages. How to access maintenance tunnels on every major station model in the outer corridor. How to change my name without triggering transit flags. She looked at him. I still haven't figured out the rest. He sat down on the room's single chair across from her. What does the rest look like, if you imagine it? She looked at him carefully. Why are you asking me that? Because you said you hadn't figured it out. I'm interested in what it would look like if you did. Most people assume the rest looks like a bonding. I'm not asking what most people assume. He held her gaze. I'm asking what you want. A long pause. The station hummed around them. The subsonic frequency of the rotation system that you stopped hearing after a few days and only noticed again in silences like this one. I want to stop moving, she said. It came out quieter than he thought she intended, or perhaps she'd intended exactly that, and the quietness was the point. I want somewhere I chose, not somewhere I was assigned, not somewhere I was born into, and not somewhere I landed because I was running from something else. Somewhere I looked at and thought, this is what I want. She was quiet for a moment, and I wanted to still be mine after I stopped running, not taken, not claimed, mine. He was quiet for a long moment after she stopped speaking. And have you found anywhere like that yet? He asked. She looked at him, and something in her expression was different from anything he'd seen in 5 days of watching her. Not the controlled face, not the calculating face. Something that hadn't quite decided yet what it was, but was leaning towards something. I don't know, she said. I've only been here 5 days. Part 5, The Choice. On the 6th day, Keth Orn made a formal complaint to the station administration office. The complaint was detailed and legally dressed, though Drek Val assessed it as weak within the first paragraph. Keth Orn argued that the Level 3 access restriction on the bioscan relay was an improper use of the compliance authority, applied selectively to benefit one party in an ongoing accord legal matter. He argued that the transmission harassment citation was politically motivated. He argued, in terms that Drek Val found both legally suspect and personally irritating, that the Velthari commander's proximity to the woman in question constituted an unfair advantage in the bonding selection process, and that the administration office was obligated to investigate. Drek Val read the complaint in his office. He noted the 3 specific procedural citations that Keth Orn had used, 2 of which were applied correctly, one of which was either a misreading or a deliberate misrepresentation of the relevant statute. He filed a response that addressed all 3 with a precision that left no procedural daylight. Then he went to find Sierra. She was in the station's small library archive, which was technically a public resource that had been empty every time he'd seen it because most of the 8,000 people on Helix 9 had no particular interest in the station's collection of Accord historical documents, xenolinguistic records, and outer station cartographic surveys from the 1st century of the Veth corridor settlements. She looked up when he came in. She had a document spread in front of her. He identified it from across the room as one of the early corridor survey reports, the kind that mapped not just the physical stations but the social networks that had developed between them. Keth Orn filed a complaint, he said. I know, he sent me a message about it right after he filed it. She set down the document. He's claiming you have a conflict of interest. He's not entirely wrong. She looked at him steadily. I do have an interest, he said. I've been honest with you about what it is, or as honest as I've been in a position to be. I'm not making a case. I don't want to be the next male standing in a corridor outside your door, and I'm aware that the difference between what I'm doing and what they're doing may not be entirely clear from the outside. He held her gaze. But I want you to know that my interest exists, and that it's not about your bloodline markers or your Accord legal standing or any of the things that are driving the 47. It's about the person who chose the corner booth and spent 5 days navigating an impossible situation with more composure than I've seen anyone manage in 3 cycles of diplomatic work. She was very quiet. Keth Orn's complaint will fail, he continued. I haven't violated any protocols. The access restriction and the citation were both within my authority and justified by the record. He knows that this is a pressure tactic. He wants you to know that the noise isn't going to stop, that even someone with my level of access can't make it stop indefinitely, and that the most direct route to ending it is for you to make a decision. And is he right? He thought about this honestly, not indefinitely, no. The 47 have legal standing to remain in proximity as long as you're here and unbonded. The Accord's framework was designed under the assumption that the woman in question would prefer the attention to end through a decision rather than through administrative intervention. He paused. That assumption was made by people who did not particularly consult women of sovereign lineage about their preferences. She almost laughed. It was a genuine sound this time, though short. No, she said, I imagine they didn't. She stood up from the archive table and walked to the small porthole window in the library's far wall. Outside, the star field moved slowly past as the station's outer rings rotated. A constant, gentle movement, visible only from the peripheral view, the kind of motion you could forget was happening until you looked directly at it. She stood there looking at it for a long moment. I've left 6 stations in 8 months, she said. 7 counting the one before Calyx Drift. I know how to leave. I've gotten very efficient at it, the timeline, the vessel selection, the documentation adjustments. I can be off a station in under 4 hours when I need to be. She didn't turn from the window. My bag is already packed. It's always packed. I don't unpack because I know I'm going to leave. He said nothing. The cargo hauler I came in on is departing tomorrow morning, she said. The captain would take me back to Calyx Drift or further out if I asked. There are always other vessels. There are always other options. She turned. That's what I would normally do. What are you going to do instead? She looked at him for a long time. The library was very quiet. I don't know yet, she said, but I want to think about it, without making the same decision I always make. She took a breath. Will you stay here while I think? He sat down in one of the archive chairs. Yes. She turned back to the window. The station rotated slowly. The stars moved past the porthole in long, unhurried arcs. Neither of them spoke for a while, a comfortable silence, which was a specific and valuable kind of silence that most people didn't know how to maintain. After a while, she said, without turning from the window, "Tell me about the Vilthari home world." He told her. He told her about the long winter season, and the way the light came through the atmospheric ice in colors that didn't have names in most other languages. The Vilthari had 17 words for the specific quality of light at different stages of the ice cycle, and none of them translated well. He told her about the cities built along the great ridge systems in the planet's northern hemisphere. The architecture adapted over centuries to the terrain, so that the buildings looked grown rather than constructed, curving along the stone faces of the ridges. He told her about the rivers that ran through the canyon floors, blue-green in summer and a deep gray-violet under the winter ice. He told her about the particular quality of silence that existed at very high elevations when the ice storms were between cycles, and everything was just still, in the way that nothing on a space station ever was. She asked questions, careful, precise questions, the kind that came from genuine curiosity rather than social obligation. What were the cities like to live in? What did people do for work? Were there markets? Was it anything like the commissary's idea of food, which she had decided was a philosophical statement about the nature of disappointment masquerading as a nutrition dispensary? He told her that the commissary's food was a crime for which no one had yet been held accountable, and she almost laughed, a real laugh this time, not the dry, cautious near laugh she'd been allowing herself. And he felt something settle in his chest, quiet and certain, that he chose not to examine too closely. Part 6. The Walk. On the 7th day, she left her quarters without her bag. She noticed that he noticed. "I unpacked," she said. She said it the way you say something that has cost something to do, something you have wanted to do for a while and kept finding reasons to put off. Just some of it. The things I don't need to keep ready. That's a significant decision. It felt like one. She looked at him steadily. "I'm not going to be here forever." "I know that, but I thought I'd try staying, just for a while, without the bag by the door." He nodded. They walked together through the upper market ring, which was considerably more comfortable than it had been 3 days ago. The suitors were still present. He could see several of them at various points in the market, making their calculations, weighing their approaches, watching without appearing to watch. But something had shifted. Perhaps because she was walking with someone now instead of alone. Perhaps because she moved differently when she wasn't running. She moved today like herself. She stopped at a vendor's stall she had apparently identified on an earlier pass as the closest thing to actual Earth origin coffee available on the station, ground from a bean analog that wasn't identical but was, the vendor claimed, cultivated from seeds brought out by a human trader 3 generations back and carefully maintained ever since. It was more expensive than the commissary machine. She bought 2 cups and handed one to him without asking. He tried it. It was substantially better than the commissary's version, considerably better actually. "I've been thinking," she said as they walked, "about what you said about interest." "Yes. You said your interest isn't in my bloodline." "It isn't." "What is it in then, specifically?" She looked at him sideways. "You said you'd be precise." He thought about how to say this accurately. They walked past a Korathi jewelry display, a human clothing vendor doing a slow but steady business in outer corridor adaptations of inner system fashion, 2 Drath traders arguing about something in a language he didn't speak but whose emotional content was clear enough. "You asked me," he said, 3 days ago why I didn't come to your door. I told you it was because I wanted you to choose where to sit." "Yes." "The longer answer is," he stopped walking. She stopped too, turning to look at him. They were in a slightly open space between two vendor rows, not precisely private but quiet enough. I've spent 3 cycles on this station watching people pursue things they want. Most of the time, the pursuit is not particularly interesting to me. It's mechanical or strategic, or it's simply appetite expressed as action. But you, he paused. You were not pursuing anything. You were navigating, calculating, surviving a situation that most people in your position would have resolved one way or another years ago. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, you were still curious. You were reading in the archive. You were asking the food machine polite questions as though it might eventually give a better answer. You were interested in things in spite of everything. He looked at her. I am interested in the person who does all of that. She held his gaze. That's quite a thing to say. I told you I'd be precise. A long moment. Around them, the market ring hummed with ordinary activity. Somewhere behind them, at careful distances, he was aware that 3 of the suitors had stopped, watching. Sierra looked at him, and then she looked quite deliberately at the corridor that extended ahead of them, away from the suitors and the market and toward the quieter residential decks. Walk with me, she said. They walked. Not quickly, not with the efficient, purposeful speed she'd used when she was navigating the station alone. Slowly, the way people walk when there's nowhere specific to be, and the point is the walking itself. I need to tell you something, she said. All right. I've been thinking about what I said, about wanting somewhere I chose. She looked ahead, not at him. I've been choosing things the whole 8 years. I chose to leave the archive settlement. I chose every vessel and every station after that. I chose when to stay and when to go, when to use a different name and when to risk the real one. A pause. But I always chose toward running, always away from something rather than toward something. Every decision I made was shaped by what I was leaving, not by what I was going to. He waited. I think she stopped walking. They were in a quiet junction between 2 corridor segments, no vendors, no suitors in line of sight. I think I want to try choosing toward something, for once, in 8 years. She turned and looked at him directly. I don't know yet what that looks like completely. I don't know you well enough, and you don't know me well enough, and I have very good reasons to be careful about things. A beat. But I want to know you better, if that's something you're interested in. He looked at her for a moment, giving the question the weight it deserved. You already know it is, he said. I know. I wanted to say it out loud anyway. Something in her expression settled into something that was quiet and certain. I'm still going to be careful. I'd expect nothing else. I'm still going to leave if I need to. Yes, that's your right always. It will remain your right. And I'm not, she took a breath. I'm not making any other kind of decision. Not yet, just this one. Just, I want to see what knowing each other looks like. He inclined his head. That's a reasonable thing to want. She almost smiled. And then she actually smiled properly, the kind that had been waiting behind the careful face for a week, the kind you couldn't quite prepare for even when you'd been watching for signs of it. It was quite something, he thought. He filed it away precisely, alongside everything else. You're very calm about all of this, she said. I have a reputation to maintain. Is the reputation accurate? He considered, mostly, right now, somewhat less than usual. She looked at him and the smile didn't quite disappear. Good, she said. I'd be more concerned if you were entirely unmoved. They walked on. Part 7, the archive again. A month later her bag was unpacked. Not packed and waiting, not packed and hopeful. Unpacked properly, in the way that meant the bag was in the corner performing its proper function as a storage vessel rather than an escape plan. She had told him this on a Tuesday morning. She had kept track of Earth days even through 8 years in the outer stations. A habit, she said, was either sentimentality or stubbornness, and she'd never decided which. While they were both in the station library, her reading one of the outer corridor historical surveys she had developed a genuine interest in. him working through a compliance report that was, admittedly, only about half receiving his attention. "I noticed," he said when she mentioned the bag. "You notice everything. Occupational habit. Is it?" She looked at him over her reader. "Or is it specifically me?" He considered this seriously. "Both." She accepted this without comment, which was its own kind of answer. "Kethorn left the station last week," she said. "Yes, 12 of the others in the same interval." He looked back at his report. "The Drath contingent departed this morning. That brings the total remaining to 23. Still 23. 14, actually, as of this afternoon. The Sorvani minor delegation cited schedule conflicts." He set down the data pad. "The numbers will continue to reduce. They're patient, but they're not unlimited in patience. And the standard interpretation of the Accord's own framework is that a sovereign lineage woman who has clearly established an ongoing voluntary relationship with a specific partner is not, in any meaningful sense, an available candidate. Some of them have read that writing on the wall more quickly than others." She was quiet for a moment, looking at her survey document. "And when the last one leaves, then you'll have the freedom to make whatever decision you want without an audience." "And if I've already made it?" The library was very quiet. Through the porthole, the stars moved in their slow arcs. "Then," he said carefully, "I would want you to feel no pressure about it. Whatever you've decided, whatever you want, is what matters. The form it takes is secondary." She stood up from her chair and walked to his table and sat down across from him, close enough that there was no ambiguity about the choice. 8 years, she said. "I spent 8 years moving because I couldn't find anywhere that felt like mine." She looked at him steadily. "Do you know what Velthari winter looks like to someone who has never been there? Not from a description, what it actually looks like." "No," he said. "I've been looking at the archive photographs, every image in the station's collection." A pause. "The atmospheric ice, the light you described that doesn't have a name, the ridge cities, the canyon rivers in the winter." She held his gaze across the table. "I want to see it in person. I want to know what the silence feels like at high elevation when the ice storms are between cycles. I want to stand somewhere where everything is still and know that I chose to be there." He kept very still. "Not as a bonding," she said. "Not yet, not as anything formal or labeled. Just I want to go somewhere that you described and that I've been thinking about for a month, and I want to go because I chose it." She looked at him steadily. "Is that something you'd want?" Drek Val looked at her for a long moment. At the face he had been reading for 6 weeks now, that held things behind it but was no longer holding them quite so far back. "Zero," he said. "Yes. I sat in a commissary for 40 minutes waiting to see if you'd walk into the room. I have wanted since that morning to show you things, all the things I told you about, and all the ones I haven't thought to mention yet. The markets in the canyon cities, which are nothing like the market ring here and considerably better in every respect. The particular quality of the food, which is genuinely excellent and bears no relationship to what the commissary machine produces. The way the ridge looks in the first light of the long morning season, which is different from any light I've seen anywhere else." He held her gaze. "Yes, it is something I would want, completely." Something in her face went very soft, the way things go soft when they stop holding themselves at a careful distance. "Good," she said, "then it's decided." His posting ended in 3 months. The winter season began in 4. She calculated this the same way she calculated everything, precisely, with the exits identified and the timeline clear, and found that it worked. For once, the timing was right. She decided to take it as a sign, or at least as a reasonable confluence of circumstances, which was the same thing with different vocabulary. Part 8. The signal again. On the last day of his posting, Drek Val filed 3 final compliance reports, resolved one remaining outstanding dispute between a Sorvani trade delegation and a Korathi cargo company that had been simmering since his second week on the station, and officially removed the Level 3 access restriction on the bioscan relay. The last remaining suitors had departed 10 days prior, and the restriction's purpose had concluded with them. The relay pinged back to full operation. 20 minutes later, a new alert propagated out across the Accord network. Not a bloodline flag, not a tracking notification, not the kind of alert that had started all of this 6 weeks ago. Something different, a registration update in the Accord's civil record system, filed under the name Sierra Vane, formerly registered under the transit alias Myra Caslin, sovereign bloodline status, current location Helix Station 9, departing. The registration noted her voluntary transit to the Velthari home world, accompanying Commander Drek Val of the Velthari Empire, 5th tier, traveling under his diplomatic credentials. Standard travel companion registration, the kind filed for any diplomatically credentialed transit. But the status field, the one that had sat empty for 8 years, the one that the Accord's registry had been waiting to fill with the word bonded, was marked with something else. Accompanied by choice. In the network's legal language, this was not a bonding. It was not a formal claim. It was not any of the things that 47 males had traveled to Helix 9 hoping to initiate. It was simply a woman telling the network where she was. Not because she was tracked, not because a bioscan had found her against her will, but because she had decided, for the first time in 8 years, that she didn't mind being found. That there was somewhere she was going that she had chosen, and she wanted the record to reflect it. The Accord's registry system processed the update, filed it, and propagated it through the standard channels. In offices across 32 member civilizations, the flag that had been attached to her name for 8 years, unregistered, unclaimed, location unknown, changed. Location known, status accompanied by choice. Sierra stood at the departure dock and looked back at Helix Station 9 through the transport's small observation window as it moved away from the docking ring. The station grew smaller against the star field. The rotating rings caught the light of the distant system's sun and threw it back in long, slow arcs, the familiar rotation that she had stopped noticing after the first week and was noticing again now that she was leaving. She had a bag. It was not packed for running. It was not packed with the careful minimalism of someone who had learned to keep everything that mattered within 30 minutes of departure. It was packed with too many things. The historical surveys she'd downloaded from the archive, a small piece of metalwork she'd bought from a Korathi vendor in the market ring on her 3rd week because she'd liked the way it looked, 2 more outfits than she strictly needed for a 4-day transit. She was traveling, it was different. Drek Val was standing 3 feet away, reading a document on his data pad, giving every appearance of being entirely calm about the fact that they were on a transport together, departing a station she had unpacked her bag in, heading toward a planet she had only seen in photographs and heard described in a commissary over suspect tea. She knew by now that the calm was not indifference. She had learned over 6 weeks to read the difference between Velthari composure and Velthari distance. They looked similar from the outside. They were not the same thing. "You're not reading that," she said. He looked up. "No," he agreed without the slightest pretense that she was wrong. "I'm not." She turned from the window. The transport moved through open space, the station falling away behind them, the star field expanding ahead in the way that always happened when you left somewhere and stopped looking at it. "Tell me something," she said. "Something you haven't told me yet, something about the winter." He set down the data pad. He thought for a moment, genuinely, with the complete attention he brought to things. In the winter season, on the 5th morning of the long night, which is the name for the period when the sun stays below the horizon for 16 consecutive days, there is a phenomenon where the atmospheric ice forms a complete ring around the visible sky. a perfect ring from horizon to horizon. The color shifts over the 16 days from deep blue at the outer edge to a gold white at the interior, and on the fifth night the proportions are exactly right. Everyone in the ridge cities comes out to see it, even people who have seen it 30 or 40 times. They come out and stand in the cold and look up. She was looking at him. "It's the kind of thing," he said, "that reminds you that being somewhere matters, that you chose to be in a specific place, standing under a specific sky, and that the sky is doing something it only does here, and that matters." The transport moved through the star field. "How long until we get there?" she asked. 4 days. "And then winter." 4 months after that. She nodded. She sat down across from him in the transport's small passenger section and picked up her own reader. She had 12 books and 9 historical surveys, and a Velthari language primer that she had started 2 weeks ago and not mentioned to him, which she was certain he had noticed. They sat in comfortable silence as the transport moved. After a while she said, without looking up from her reading, "I chose well." He looked at her. "The booth," she said, "in the commissary. I looked at the room and I looked at you in the corner and I made a choice." She turned a page. "I chose well." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said, and returned to his document. Outside the transport window, the stars moved past in long, unhurried arcs, and somewhere ahead, still 4 days away but already entirely decided, a planet waited with its winter coming and its ridge cities and its canyon rivers turning gray-violet under the ice, and a particular silence at high elevation that she had been imagining for a month and was going to stop imagining very soon. She didn't unpack during the transit. She didn't need to. She wasn't going anywhere. == And == Word count. ~9, 950 words, ~62 minutes at 160 WPM. Title: They all chased her, she walked to me. HFY Sci-Fi romance. Seed microchip 2019. Surveillance tracking hidden identity being hunted, choosing to be found. Channel: HFY Princess Queen romance. Structure: 8 parts single complete story. ==